At that time, Qingzhi, who had just crossed the river, had just tricked her former grandfather out of a sum of money. I am preparing to take my twin brother who has traveled with me to another place to start a new life. Unwanted but forced to get involved in another event. I thought everything was just an accident. But as we delved deeper into our understanding, it was only then that I realized there was something strange about my background as a peasant girl. Chasing and conspiracies followed one after another, the continuation of life, the inheritance of blood, forcing the siblings to move in an unknown direction instead of hiding and surviving. It's better to face difficulties and give it a try. Some people believe that fate is hard to change, but they only believe that man can conquer nature. Since there were layers of obstacles in front of them, they broke through and showed it to others. However, what's going on with this dog skin ointment that can't be thrown away and can't be driven away? Qingzhi. Aren't we here to farm? Qingzhi. Speak as if you know it. Keywords of the novel. 1 or 2 horizontal branches of the bamboo outer plum without a pop-up window. 1 or 2 horizontal branches of the bamboo outer plum. Download the complete set of TXT, and read the latest chapters of 1 or 2 horizontal branches of the bamboo outer plum. What about my younger brother in Chapter 1? You are listening at novelfull.audio. What about my younger brother in Chapter 1? Creaking, creaking. Creaking, creaking. A pair of patched old cotton shoes stepped on the new snow that had just fallen yesterday. The owner of the feet was in a hurry, and the sound of breathing during the walk echoed throughout the world. It is now the 4th year of Xinbao, the 5th day of the first lunar month. Every household in Qingzhi village is decorated with colorful lanterns, and the bright red couplets and colorful hanging coins are set off by the snow, creating a particularly festive atmosphere. When passing by other people's doors, one can still vaguely hear the laughter and joy coming from the yard. However, these sounds did not stop him for a moment. He lowered his sheepskin hat, shrank his shoulders and clasped his hands, and quickly walked towards the dilapidated courtyard at the end of the village. The courtyard is in a state of disrepair. The adobe walls of the courtyard have collapsed a lot, and now only one of the original 3 adobe houses in the courtyard stands crooked and crooked. The windows are blocked with worn-out mats made of grass, but the mats are full of holes. The wooden door can no longer be closed due to the deformation of the door frame. It is only tied with an old grass rope. Every time the wind blows, a few grass strands in the rope jump out of the large queue, making people worry that the door will open wide in the next second due to strong winds. Quickly, the person arrived at their destination and stood in front of such a courtyard, still somewhat stunned. He didn't expect to see such a scene, and his heart felt as if a stone was blocking him, indescribable sadness. But he was stunned for just a moment. He tightened his old leather jacket and took 2 steps to cross the low wall pier. But to everyone's surprise, I walked too quickly and without any precautions. I walked over, but my feet were unstable. I stepped on the snow-covered gravel and immediately stumbled, almost falling into the snow. He instinctively waved his hands and quickly stabilized his figure. Although he was fine, the paper bag in his arms fell out. The oiled paper was not strong enough, and when it fell to the ground, it broke open, revealing several steaming buckwheat skin dumplings inside. The dumplings rolled in the snow and were covered in a lot of snow. The man's mouth sank and his eyes turned red as soon as he saw the dumpling fall. That behavior and demeanor look very incompatible with his age. He endured for a while without holding back, but thinking about the purpose of his trip, he cried and squatted on the ground, carefully picking up the dumplings. He held one in his hand and pouted to blow the snow off it, but the dumplings were too hot and the snow had already melted on top. He shook off the oil paper on the ground and picked it up, picking up the dumplings one by one and putting them back inside. I wiped away my tears, tidied up my mood, and knocked on the wooden door. 2 thin and frail figures huddled together in the door, covered in thick thatch. However, the thatch was not new, but old and dusty, with a hint of winter dampness. There was a lot of snow piled up on the thatch, which had been melted by the body temperature and slowly turned into ice crystals by the cold winter wind. The icy person felt a chilling chill. The sound outside was urgent and worried, but the two figures inside remained motionless. Knocked for a while. The person outside the door finally couldn't wait anymore. He trembled a bit, his rough big hand gripping the twisted outer edge of the wooden door, and with one force, the grass rope was immediately snapped. The man opened the door and walked in, his gaze not as dim as he had imagined. He looked up and saw a bright sky above his head. The thatch covering the two of them turned out to have fallen from the roof. The two figures hugging each other became somewhat stiff. The dumplings in the man's hand suddenly fell to the ground. Miss Qingzhi, young Master Qingzhi. He immediately took off his tattered leather jacket and covered the two figures on the wooden board. When he picked up the two children, the cold touch made him shiver all over, and since then, his trembling has been unbearable. Miss Qingzhi. Young Master Qingzhi. Wake up, wake up. His breath sprayed on their faces, but the two children remained motionless. His trembling fingers extended towards the nostrils of both of them. Although he was foolish, he fully understood that the two of them might not be able to do it anymore. Otherwise, in such a cold day, as long as there was breathing, there could not be no water vapor after probing, it was as he had imagined. He opened his mouth wide and slowed down for a long time before it seemed like he had regained his voice. Grandpa Yen. It's a pillar that I'm sorry for you. I couldn't even save your last bone and blood. Ah 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 ah. He cried in sorrow, his dirty single clothes covered in sweat, holding the arms of his two children and constantly patting his leather jacket. He had an inexplicable emotion in his heart, as if it was the only way to vent it. Ah ah ah. Grandpa Yen. You left too early. Ah ah ah. Ah. Just as he was crying uncontrollably, his howling voice suddenly stopped. Looking down, I saw the older child suddenly starting to twitch. The man's crying stopped, and the sadness was immediately replaced by fear, but immediately turned into ecstasy. He increased his breathing rate a bit faster and immediately picked up the two children. Mississippi Miss Qingzhi. Can you hear me? Miss Qingzhi. The convulsing child's whole body is convulsing, but their eyes are not open. The man rushed out of the dilapidated courtyard in a panic and headed towards another direction in the village. The two children were neither light nor heavy, but they were also a burden. The snow on the road was too deep, and he stumbled and stumbled. When he ran, he couldn't control himself and slipped out. He, dressed in a single coat, didn't feel cold even when he fell into the snow, just a worried expression that couldn't be concealed. He didn't dare to delay, so he quickly went over to pick up the two children. The older child was still convulsing and his face was turning a bit blue. At the sight, he was extremely panicked and rushed forward. He didn't stand firm, but instead fell out again. This time, he fell even harder, hitting two children with a somersault. Yan Qingzhi's soul seemed to sink into the water, and no matter how hard she struggled, she could not break through this deep water. She felt like she had seen the light on her head, but she swam and swam towards it desperately, unable to get close to the light. She was swimming too tired, and the suffocating feeling left her with no strength left, too tired. Forget it. As if there was a voice repeating in her ear. Her consciousness was not very clear, but the voice was very clear. She felt something was wrong, but her stagnant thinking made it impossible for her to refute. Just as her consciousness was getting further and further away from the light, her body suddenly sank. The whole person suddenly broke free from that suffocating state. Her eyes suddenly opened and she looked in confusion towards the direction of her gaze. Pain. It hurts in every crevice of the bone. Hot. My body seems to be burning. A burst of cold air surged into her chest, and she heard her sharp breathing. The icy sensation made her shiver uncontrollably. As soon as she opened her eyes, the disheveled man in front of her almost burst into tears of joy. His hat had been thrown off, His oily hair was still messy, and the steaming mist above his head made people feel his hot mood at the moment. "Miss Qingzhi. You're awake." Yan Qingzhi looked closely at the person, her body stiff and uncontrollable. Several questions flashed through my mind at lightning speed. Who am I? Where am I? What about my younger brother? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Yan Qingzhi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Yan Qingzhi. The last thing she remembers is that she and her brother were on their way to school by taxi. In a daze, it seemed like a big car was rushing towards them. She's so cold and piercing. But the man next to him was so surprised. "Miss Qingzhi, how are you doing?" Yan Qingzhi trembled all over and checked her condition. She was dressed in a single garment, with many blue and purple chilblains and many using cracks on her hands. Her fingers were as thin as chopsticks, indicating that her body was not an adult. She was cold all over and looked around in confusion. My heart seems to be suffocated by a heavy mountain. Her name is Yan Qingzhi, 20 years old, and she is a sophomore student studying at the best university in the country. She also has a twin brother named Yan Qingzhu. The two are in the same university, but not in the same class. Yan Qingzhu is a top student, jumping all the way to the next level. At the same age as her, she was already admitted to graduate school at the age of 19. The relationship between the two is also different from that of ordinary siblings. When I was young, due to twins, it was inevitable that I would compare myself to each other. Both of them had bad personalities, and if they didn't agree, they would have to beat each other's brains out. When Yan Qingzhi was a child, she relied on the girl's early development and often beat Yan Qingzhu. Yan Qingzhu didn't care whether Yan Qingzhi was her own sister or not, and she never softened when she could cheat her. At that time, the only lifelong enemy of the two was their twin sister or younger brother. Yan Qingzhi understood that she found it difficult to defeat her opponent in terms of intelligence, so she gritted her teeth and learned Sanda, preparing to beat Yan Qingzhu for a lifetime. Unfortunately, this dream had not yet been realized when the parents passed away unexpectedly. The two people who used to fight like dogs were left with only each other overnight. They were only 13 years old at the time and were all at a loss in the face of sudden changes. Their previous arrogance was like a joke, losing their shelter. The two were just paper tigers. Grandpa was biased, although he seemed sad for 2 days, he quickly sided with his uncle. The two uncles and uncles were even more outrageous, sharing their parents' inheritance and compensation in the name of their grandfather, but none of them were willing to take care of the two. After passing the buck to each other for a while, the two were kicked out of the house. Later, it was my grandmother who pitted them and took them to live at my uncle's house. But my uncle and aunt don't like their siblings because their tuition and living expenses are all paid by my grandmother. Although they can't say anything on the surface, they always complain that the money for both of them should belong to their family. The two cousins of my uncle's family have heard so much and often make sarcastic remarks. It is always difficult to rely on others. Grandmother felt guilty and worried that her uncle would drive the two away, so she asked them to endure more. Life at home is not easy, and there are also many troubles in school. Yan Qingzhu, who was young and had good grades, was immediately bullied by his classmates when he jumped into high school. He has no parents, no one stands out, and he has been bullied twice without any place to speak. The people in his class have become even more outrageous when they see this. Until one day Yan Qingzhu's injuries were discovered by Yan Qingzhi. This situation has completely changed. At that time, Yan Qingzhi was only in her first year of junior high school, just a little one. I don't know if she was brave or foolish at that time. Dare to go directly to high school and fight with guys who are much taller than her. Even if she has practiced Sanda, she cannot resist the lack of strength and is always beaten hard. But every time, they also put in a lot of effort to open the other person's ladle. Almost all the boys in Yan Qingzhu's class have beaten her and also been beaten by her. The school leaders hurt her brain as soon as they saw her, but she was still stubborn and terrifying. No matter what others said, she would never admit her mistake, sticking to her neck and being very arrogant. I don't know what she was persistent about. Every time, my grandmother and Qingzhi have to go to the education center to cry and complain. Only with a nose full of tears can we bring her out of the parents who are fighting against her. My uncle, who is usually silent towards the two of them, often complains about her lack of understanding. However, she didn't have much resentment towards her uncle in her heart, and even felt grateful at one point when the siblings were so confused. My uncle once gave them a place to rest. No matter how unpleasant the process was, for both of them, kindness cannot be easily erased. Unfortunately, this gratitude is just their wishful thinking. Those false favors quickly dissipated with the passing of my grandmother. The death of her daughter had a great impact on the old lady. At that time, her health was very poor, and even after dragging on for 2 years, she couldn't let go of her 2 children. Qingzhi finally couldn't resist the weakness of his body, and in the end, he procrastinated and went. As soon as my grandmother left, my aunt and uncle immediately turned their backs and kicked out Qingzhi, who was 15 years old at the time, without saying a word. At that time, in the first half of Qingzhi's freshman year, both of them were the most able to spend money. Qingzhi didn't know what to do, so she thought that compared to Qingzhi, she wasn't the material to study, so why not give it up? But Qingzhi disagrees no matter what. He took leave and came back in a few days. I helped Qingzhi with her accommodation and left her some living expenses. I told her not to worry, as he has been working part-time and has some savings during this period. Additionally, I have a good relationship with senior students in the school. I am optimistic about his newly written paper, helped organize a project, and even secured a sponsorship. As long as I continue to dig deeper, there will be a considerable amount at that time. Qingzhi didn't understand what he was saying, so she took his boasting seriously. No matter how difficult it may be, Qingzhi will send her money, and she has never doubted it. It wasn't until later that she also got into his school and heard about what had happened to him in those years. The paper was replaced by someone, the project was deceived, and I worked as a laborer to pick up leftovers. He is just a teenager. No matter how smart he is, he cannot resist his limited experience. Qingzhi couldn't imagine how much pressure Qingzhi had experienced at that time. Although she often went to do odd jobs, compared to the other party, those days were already much better. Qingzhi doesn't have much attachment to that world, but she has abundant emotions towards Qingzhi. Two people rely on each other, and their significance to each other is not only limited to family affection, but also a spiritual bond and sustenance for each other. Just like Qingzhi at that time, if it weren't for Qingzhi, he would have gone through multiple blows and would likely have fallen into a state of decline, or perhaps it would have been years of decline and seeing more scenery before he could have fully realized. But just because of Qingzhi, everything is different. There is a softness in his heart, and as long as he remembers his responsibility, he will become incredibly strong in the face of wind and rain. Qingzhi is the same to Qingzhi. She sat in the snow, as if her heart had been hollowed out. As long as she thought that Qingzhi might not have had her luck and died directly in that car accident, she couldn't control her emotions. Miss Qingzhi. The man was a bit stunned, watching her go from confusion to sorrow, with no way out. Qingzhi sat on the ground, thinking about Qingzhi. Her heart was throbbing with pain, and her sadness was hard to suppress. She ignored it and burst into tears. Her younger brother. Her brother who relies on each other for survival. Ah ah ah. Ah ah ah. Her crying was louder than a man's shouting, with warm tears rolling down her eyes, and when it landed on the back of her hand, it had already become cold. But she couldn't feel it at all, except for crying loudly. Her mind was blank. The man listened to her crying with full confidence, with a strange expression on his face. He was worried, uncomfortable, relieved, and inexplicably wanted to laugh. The two of them cried and looked at each other, completely forgetting that there was still someone on the snow. Just as Yan Qingzhi's crying sounded, the other party's eyebrows also furrowed, and a thought suddenly floated in her heart. Who is this? Crying like my big sister. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Yan Qingzhi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Yan Qingzhi was completely unaware of the situation around her and only cried her heart out. The crying was so unpleasant that even the sparrows around were startled and flew up. After listening for a while, the man beside him finally realized something ordinary. Miss Qingzhi. Are you crying for your younger brother? Upon hearing about her younger brother, Yan Qingzhi immediately woke up for a moment and quickly looked at the man. However, upon seeing that unfamiliar face, she immediately realized that she should not be in the previous world. I have traveled through time. But what about Qingzhi? When she thought of Qingzhi, she couldn't help it anymore. Ah ah ah. Ah ah ah. The tone fluctuated and the crying remained unpleasant. The man quickly comforted her and picked up another child on one side of the ground. Although he had sniffed before, he couldn't say for sure if he could detect it accurately. Now that Yan Qingzhi is alive, he feels in his heart that Yan Qingzhi should also be alive. His movements were rough, and he didn't care if the child felt comfortable, so he just started pulling and, like those women holding their children, vigorously patted the thin back of the child in his arms. While filming, she called Yan Qingzhi to take a look. Yan Qingzhi was crying uncontrollably, with no intention of turning her head. Miss Qingzhi, take a look. Young Master Qingzhi is also alive. Take a look. Yan Qingzhi didn't believe it, but when she was annoyed by the man's pull, she turned her head and said, ah ah. Turning his head, he met a pair of clear eyes. The child in front of him is shriveled and frail, looking only 4 or 5 years old. His hair is dry and fragmented, and his face is also waxy yellow. Due to his thinness, his eyes look large, as if he has taken up half of his face. Yan Qingzhi. Who is this person? I don't know. Ah, ah, ah. Ah. Yan Qingzhi looked at Yan Qingzhi in front of her, who was yellow-skinned and had big eyes occupying half of her face. Who is this person? Crying is as unpleasant as my older sister. He has heard Yan Qingzhi's crying twice in his life, once when his parents passed away, and once when he learned about his recent college years. He has always known that Yan Qingzhi is a strong person. When he was 6 or 7 years old, he insisted on setting aside 3 or 4 hours of time every day to practice martial arts in order to beat him for a lifetime. As I grew up, even though I didn't love studying, I forced myself to go to a university with him because he provided it. She never cries, even if she gets beaten up in a fight with her classmates, or if other parents say insulting things, as long as she hits the other person's head with blood, she never feels aggrieved. Therefore, the 2 cries of Yan Qingzhi can never be dispersed in his memory. The 2 of them looked at each other silently for a long time. The induction between twins, which had never occurred in the previous life, actually appeared when they were no longer twins in this life. Yan Qingzhi's gaze changed from helplessness and sadness to joy and joy. Her crying voice has also evolved from unpleasant to extremely unpleasant. Ah ah. I thought I would never see you again in my life. Ah ah ah. When crying, she didn't forget to pull Yan Qingzhi over and hold him tightly in her arms. Ah ah ah. Ah ah ah. Yan Qingzhi. The man sitting on the side didn't know that in just this moment, the child he remembered had become 2 souls from another world. But looking at the thin clothes of the 2 children, he finally remembered that he should find a place to place them first. He wrapped the 2 children in a leather jacket, picked them up, and headed towards the previous destination. After being picked up by him, Yan Qingzhi's emotions gradually calmed down. The 2 of them stretched out their fur coats and looked at the man and his surroundings. The man is not young and seems to be in his 30s or 40s. He looks dirty and there seems to be old dirt on his neck that has not been cleaned. The hat was crooked on the head due to the hurry just now. There is still an indescribable smell in his fur jacket. Although they are not very old, both of them have experienced the harshness of the world, and their disgust is beyond words. They are just thinking about something in their hearts. It's already dawn, and many villagers around have come out to sweep the snow. Seeing men on the road is very malicious. Someone smiled and asked him. "Pillar, what's going on here?" Ah. Whose child is this from?" Halfway through, I saw the appearance of Yan Qingzhi and Yan Qingzhu clearly, and they all closed their mouths. The man called the pillar was completely focused, ignoring whatever others said along the way. Of course, he didn't forget to warn the siblings in his arms. You should also have less contact with them in the future. Mom said they have bad intentions and are all bad people. Yan Qingzhi does not comment on this. After all, she is an adult who has established her own worldview and has set her own standards for behavior and behavior. However, out of respect for the man, she obediently nodded, and at the same time, her other side of the head was also the same. The two of them looked at each other and could see each other's thoughts. Because it was too cold, the man ran very fast. Yan Qingzhi huddled up and looked around at the familiar scenery that she had never seen before, carefully pondering the situation under her gaze. She has partial memory of the original owner. The original name was Yan Qingzhi, which had the same pronunciation but different characters as her name. She was only 10 years old during the Chinese New Year and was a child of a landlord's family here. The landlord's name is Yan Yuhuan, and most of the land in the entire village belongs to his family. The father of the original owner was his eldest son, named Yan Maochun. It is said that when he was just born, he also won his father's favor. However, his birth mother passed away early, and his biological father quickly remarried. The memories of this favor became less and less, until they completely disappeared. It is said that having a stepmother leads to having a stepfather, which is the most appropriate statement in the Yan family. My stepmother gave birth to a son soon after entering the house, and her status is very stable. In order to prevent Yan Maochun from inheriting the family business, she tried every means to suppress it, and finally married him a sick wife. After giving birth to 2 children, she passed away within 2 years. Yan Maochun was once designed to fall into the water by his stepmother in his early years. His hidden illness had not yet healed, and he was also a person of great affection and righteousness. The death of his first wife dealt a great blow to him, and his hidden illness broke out. He followed suit in less than 2 years. Having 2 children left behind became a thorn in his stepmother's side. The 2 children lived a difficult life, doing hard and tiring work all day long. Yan's family often scolded them, and they often didn't give them food. Yan Qingzhu is now 7 years old, but he looks the same as someone else who is 4 or 5 years old. Yan Qingzhi's age of 10 is also a small one. Even so, Mrs. Yan still looked down on the 2 of them. At the age when Yan Qingzhi was able to establish a female household, she drove them out without saying a word. They are all so vicious, yet they don't forget to promote their reputation outside, claiming to be the 2 despicable stars of Kofu Komu. She was also raised to an age of self-reliance before being driven away. Most of the people in the village rely on the Yan family to make a living, and when the 2 siblings are driven out, there are naturally many people who fall into trouble. The cotton clothes of the 2 people were directly snatched, and the yard allocated to them was also directly pushed down by someone. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. 2 Bookworms. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. 2 Bookworms. In just 4 days, the 2 children froze to death in that dilapidated courtyard. Due to similar experiences, Yan Qingzhi sympathized with them very much. But when it comes to avenging the original owner, she feels that her current small body is still equivalent to strength. Of course, if there is a chance to fall into a well and hit a stone, she definitely doesn't mind stepping on it. Quickly, the three of them arrived at a remote courtyard gate. The courtyard is also adobe, with thick and sturdy walls. After entering the courtyard, several houses are neatly arranged, and the glass on the windows is very rough, but frost crystals can be seen, indicating that the room is also warm. When the two of them were surprised to find glass here, an old lady with gray hair had already heard the commotion and walked out. As soon as she saw the pillar carrying the two children back in a single coat, her face immediately changed. Qingzhi also has many memories about the two of them. The man holding her was named Li Zhua, a stranger. His mother took him to escape, and he was a bit foolish. In those years, Yan Maochun saved his life, and he remembered it to this day. His family's conditions are not good, and the people in the village are used to their influence. They all look down on him, and he can't be called a wife. He just lives in such a messy way. The old lady was very angry. "Oh my God! How did my mother tell you that? Don't worry about the affairs of the Yan family, why don't you listen?" Li Zhu was not satisfied and squeezed into the room with his two children in his arms. The old lady was infuriated by his deceitful behavior, but she felt sorry for him running so far in a single coat. "I could only hate the itching of my teeth," and my big palm slapped his back hard a few times until he ran into the house. The room was indeed warm, and Qingzhi, who had already frozen through, trembled all over. Li Zhu placed the two children on the kong and quickly spread the bedding, allowing them to lie inside. I just turned around and played pranks with the old lady in a tattered fur jacket. Mom, you don't know. When my son went, the yard collapsed and the roof was gone. They were both freezing and suffocating. The old lady was too lazy to pay attention to him and went all the way to the back room. Li Zhu followed her step by step and also went to the back room. The two voices drifted further and further away, giving Qingzhi and her younger brother time to discuss in detail. "It seems that we have crossed paths." Qingzhi looked unhappy and went into bed again. "It's really cold." Qingzhi sighed. "Living is better than dying." After saying these words, he felt too discouraged and added a sentence. "And since both of us are alive, it's better than anything." Upon hearing these words, Qingzhi almost burst into tears again. Fortunately, my mood was quickly calmed down. Afterwards, in order to prevent revealing their secrets, the two of them chattered on and talked about many things from their memories, briefly confirming them, and then clarified the issue of character design. Both children used to be insecure and cowardly, and their personalities were relatively strong, obviously they couldn't pretend, which is a big problem. After pondering for a while, both of them felt that the best way to maintain their persona was to stay away from those acquaintances in their memories. However, following the next question, how to stay away? In the end of the discussion, they didn't come up with a solution. They didn't even have a piece of clothing, and if they were far away, they might freeze to death just a short distance away. Just as I was thinking, the door opened. They quickly shut up and looked up, only to see Zhu Nyang walking in with a face and a large wooden basin. Wooden pots have been around for quite some time now, and the rough edges have been polished smooth. There are also some oil stains in the gaps at the bottom of the pot. She placed the wooden basin next to the mud stove, then turned around and walked away with her face pulled. The two of them looked at the large wooden basin lying on the ground, feeling a bit confused. A series of question marks have already floated above my head. What is this wooden basin used for? Make a fire. Can't you use a wooden basin to start a fire? Is it preparing to be placed inside the house to use the principle of condensation and heat release for heating? That's not possible. The temperature in the room is above zero. To be honest, both of them were actually confused about everything in this room. What kind of heated kong table, stove, kong cabinet? Qingzhi is a bit better. Her major is wood research and production. In simple terms, she is a carpenter who has research on wooden houses, furniture, machinery, and so on. However, she has not yet explored the time to travel back to her ancestors. Qingzhi is completely confused. He is studying mathematics just as the two of them were puzzled by the function of the wooden basin. Zhu Nyang brought in 2 more buckets of water. A bucket of cold water, a bucket of hot water. The two of them suddenly felt embarrassed for a moment, feeling like the nerd was just talking about themselves. What a brain! I inexplicably took a puff like this. Very shameful. Zhu Nyang didn't say a word to the two of them. Although she was dissatisfied with her son's behavior, the 2 children were already here, and everything she said was nonsense. Moreover, Yan Maochun did save her son's life, which she cannot deny. She already had a plan in her heart to send off her 2 children in the next few days. Afterwards, she also moved away with the pillar, and they no longer planted the land of the Yan family. They just gave back Yan Maochun's life-savingly pillar. She lifted Qingzhi out of her bed and placed her directly on the ground. Qingzhi looked at Li Pozi's face, which was almost on her feet, and remained silent, afraid to speak. Li Pozi acted swiftly and turned her head to lower the curtain on the edge of the Kong, blocking Qingzhi's line of sight. Afterwards, he tied the door inside again, afraid that the fool Li Zhu might break in. After tidying up, she poured water into the wooden basin, adjusted the water temperature, and then helped Qingzhi take off her clothes. The thin single garment was taken off, revealing the lean body inside. It was covered in blue and purple marks, some were frozen, some were thrown, and some were beaten by thorns. Apart from the face, there was no good skin on the whole body. Although Li Pezi didn't like to see the two of them, she was still shocked when she saw the injuries. Her hands trembled twice and she let out a leisurely sigh. It's okay. It's all fate. After that, although she still didn't speak, her hand movements became much gentler. After helping Qingzhi take a shower and applying some ointment to her, I finally pulled out a clean inner garment and wrapped her up, stuffing her into the already heated bed. The bed just now was covered in Qingzhi's body temperature, which was cold. In fact, when she lay inside, she didn't feel much comfortable, but now it's different. The dry and warm feeling made her body relax instantly. As soon as I relaxed, the injuries on my body inevitably started to ache, and my stomach began to moan incessantly. After taking a shower for her, Li Pezi went outside and poured out the bathwater thoroughly. Then she brought back 2 buckets of water and washed Qingzhi again. Qingzhi was a bit embarrassed, but judging from Li Pozi's expression, he didn't dare to say a word. The temperature in the room is getting higher and higher, but the two of them are lying on it without any discomfort. Li Pozi collected some soil from outside and covered the water on the ground before bringing food to the two of them. Each person has a bowl of white rice and clear congee. The rice is broken and can't be boiled. But in their current situation, there is no reason to dislike them. After thanking Mrs. Li, they took the bowl and drank it all. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Space of Yuhuan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The Space of Yuhuan. With something in the stomach, the body temperature slowly rises. Qingzhi was so hot that she couldn't cover her quilt. She quietly stretched out one leg to cool down, but Li Pezi caught her eye and stuffed her leg back into the bed. Don't move around. You two are freezing cold. If you don't want to be sick in the future, just lie down in bed. I'll come over and wipe your sweat later. The two of them are not really children, they are very obedient and honest. Li Pezi tidied up her bowl and went out. Later, she brought in 2 bowls of ginger soup. This ginger soup was cooked by old ginger, and it was so spicy that their mouths were numb. However, Mrs. Li didn't let them go and asked them to eat all the ginger slices used to make the ginger soup before leaving. After drinking ginger soup, the two of them began to sweat. The sweat was icy cold, as if carrying a chill from their bodies. And at this moment, Qingzhi suddenly felt uncomfortable, feeling pain all over her body. After being busy outside for a while, Mrs. Li brought in water again and wiped their bodies with a warm handkerchief. After wiping off the sweat, Yan Qingzhi was still normal, but Yan Qingzhi suddenly lost a drop of sweat and immediately developed a high fever. She lay on the scorching hot kong, feeling extremely cold, and soon fell into a daze. In a daze, she seemed to dream of the past again. At that time, her parents were still alive, and her biggest annoyance every day was not realizing the reason for beating Yan Qingzhi. The time in the dream does not flow normally, but instead turns upside down from her teenage years, and as she turns around, she becomes what she looks like. At that moment, she seemed to see clearly the faces of her parents whom she had not seen in many years. They were still young and trusted by her. Suddenly, tears welled up in her eyes, and years of grievances made her entire heart moist. She has a lot to say to them, fearless persistence and grievances, as well as guilt and longing for her younger brother. Thousands of words, but she doesn't know where to start. Sometimes she thinks that a tired life has worn away all her memories, but everything in her dream is so clear, as if she was jogging to open the door, throwing her backpack on the sofa, bouncing back and forth to the kitchen, pulling the stove that is about her height, and peeking at her mother to see if she had added an extra piece of meat to Yan Qingzhi's plate after they left. Yan Qingzhi had never dreamed so clearly of their appearance, nor had she ever experienced such grievances. They stood not far away, looking at Yan Qingzhi, who was already very, very small, with a gentle and reluctant smile looking at each other. It seemed as if all the past had been forgiven, and the warm feeling made Yan Qingzhi almost want to indulge. Dreams are dreams, and when it's time to wake up, always be clear-headed. The next evening, Yan Qingzhi's high fever subsided and she finally regained consciousness. This burn lasted for a day and a night. Opening her eyes, she saw the old wooden beams and fallen grass mats on her head. Yan Qingzhi was lost for a moment before recalling where she was. Yan Qingzhi sat next to her in a spacious old coat, with a pale face and red eyes, clearly not sleeping all night. The two mother and son of the Li family are not in the room. As soon as she opened her eyes, Yan Qingzhi quickly crawled over. "You're quite awake." His tone was a bit choked up. The two of them even survived a fatal car accident. If they had died in a high fever on the first day of their journey, they wouldn't know what they would have suffered in their hearts. It took Yan Qingzhi a while to break free from such a real dream. Looking at Yan Qingzhi, who was worried, she pursed her lips and spoke in a hoarse voice. "I dreamt of my parents. They want us to live well." Yan Qingzhi was taken aback for a moment, his eyes turning red, and he felt an indescribable sadness in his heart. A small body mixed with mature expressions looks inexplicably cute. The lovely feeling that made Yan Qingzhi feel heavy suddenly became incredibly joyful. She was strangely amused by the scene, but unfortunately, with this smile, her cracked mouth immediately oozed a hint of blood, and her whole body began to ache, making her gasp for breath. Yan Qingzhi instantly regained consciousness from the desolation just now and explained his worries. "Yesterday, an old doctor came over and said that your body had suffered serious losses and injuries, coupled with the cold 2 days ago, which caused a high fever. However, you are young and have survived the high fever. If you take good care of yourself in the future, there won't be much trouble." Yan Qingzhi sighed upon hearing these words, but did not force herself to get up. Lying there looking at the roof, it took a long time before asking, "What is the situation on Yan's side?" Yan Qingzhi listened to her question and told her the truth. "Someone came to the Yan family yesterday and asked the Li family to drive us away, otherwise we wouldn't rent land to them. Grandma Li said that you are sick now, and even if you want to rush, you always have to wait for you to recover. However, their attitude is quite tough, and it is estimated that the Li family will also be implicated when we leave." Yan Qingzhi's expression did not change much, but her hand tightly grasped it. This experience of being driven away made her unconsciously think of the time when she was kicked out by her uncle. Yan Qingzhi understood her heart not, but he had previously worried about Yan Qingzhi, which put other ideas on hold. "By the way, I forgot to tell you something." He suddenly thought of something very important. Qingzhi noticed that his tone was incorrect and turned her head slightly to look at him. Look at this. As he spoke, he pulled out a white jade ring from his neck. The jade ring is of ordinary quality, a small one with a diameter of only about 2 centimeters, smooth and round. It is tied with a black rope and hung around the neck without making a hole. Qingzhi's face changed at the sight of the jade ring. Regardless of the physical pain, she reached out and groped around her neck, then pulled out an identical jade ring. They are not unfamiliar with this jade ring. It is said that it was bought by their parents when they were born and brought to them. Later, due to the poor quality and low value of the jade, the two of them did not sell it during the most difficult time, so they continued to wear it on their bodies until the day they had a car accident. I didn't have it on me yesterday. Qingzhi's voice immediately lowered, afraid of being discovered. Yesterday, Mrs. Li took a bath for 2 people, and if she had, she would have noticed it. Yes, when I was watching over you yesterday, I suddenly fainted for a moment without even a second. When I shook my mind, I felt my neck sink, and when I pulled it out, I saw a black rope around your neck. I guess you're just like me. Upon hearing these words, Qingzhi's heart sank and she sat up regardless of her physical pain. Didn't anyone notice? Qingzhi shook his head. Later on, I didn't dare to let Grandma Li wipe you off. All I said was that you had a high fever and just wipe your hands and feet. I could do it too, so I took over the job of taking care of you. Qingzhi's frown furrowed slightly before letting go, but then Qingzhi said another message that made her hair stand on end. Also, I tried it yesterday and as long as I concentrate on feeling the jade ring, I can open up a space. Qingzhi turned her head and looked closely at him, her heart full of turmoil and thoughts. Following the thought of something, he quickly went to experiment with his own jade ring and found that, as Qingzhi had said, a square space with a length, width, and height of about 2 meters suddenly opened up. This space seemed to coincide with the location where the two of them were together. But it has no physical substance and cannot be touched. Upon closer inspection, Qingzhi could only see a clear torn garment in the ethereal space. With a thought in her mind, she grabbed her torn clothes and went to see Qingzhi. She was also shocked to see him, as if she was also going to check something. In an instant, his face turned red and excited. Did you put this in? Qingzhi quickly asked, and Qingzhi immediately nodded. Indeed, it seems that we have mastered the same space. Although one space is not as large as 2 spaces, the role of one space is much greater than that of 2 spaces. In this era, the most rare thing is still instant messaging. A space where 2 people can connect with each other no matter where they are. What is more important than this? Qingzhi wanted to ask more questions, but at that moment, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside the door, followed by someone pulling the door in. They quickly put away their tattered clothes and hurriedly hid the jade ring back in their clothes. As soon as the things were hidden, Mrs. Li took 2 bowls of congee, lifted the thick straw curtain and walked in. When she saw Qingzhi woke up, her face was happy, but it seemed that she had thought of something and fell down in an instant. Wake up and have something to eat. Then he put congee on the edge of the kong. The bowl was still a coarse porcelain bowl, congee was still white rice congee, and the inside was still broken rice, but no one hated it. They quickly and sincerely thanked them, and then they picked up congee and drank it clean. In the following 2 days, Qingzhi's body quickly recovered, and the two of them also learned a lot of things that the Yan siblings did not know before from the Li family's mother and son, and gained a simple understanding of the world. The country name here is Dezhou, not any dynasty in history that they are familiar with. The folk customs of Dezhou are open, and although the status of women is lower than where they used to live, it is not as low as in ancient times. The current ruler is the 4th emperor of Dezhou, named Zhuyu, who is 45 years old, and his reign title is Xian Bao. Although he was the 4th emperor, the Great Zhou dynasty was established for less than 100 years. It is said that the first emperor was a woman named Zhao, with a high reputation and great contributions to the great Zhao dynasty. Unfortunately, her life was short and she was killed by the previous emperor before the founding of the country. She was also posthumously honored as Zhao Taizu by the later emperor. The year when the country was established is called the first year of Taizu. In the second year, her adopted son Yuhuan succeeded to the throne, with the reign named Jianan. Emperor Jianan devoted his entire life to governance, worked diligently, and the economy and agriculture of Dezhou gradually regained vitality in his hands. Unfortunately, it was also very short-lived. He died in his 50s and served as the emperor for 26 years. The crown prince ascended to the throne, his reign title was Ding Tian, and he inherited the will of the previous emperor. He devoted himself wholeheartedly to the welfare of the people, and served as the emperor for less than 40 years before passing away. He left the now vibrant Dezhou to his second son Zhuyu. So if the four emperors are put together, they will only be in power for a few decades. I heard that the 2 sons and 1 daughter born to the empress are still alive today. As relatives of the imperial family, they enjoyed wealth and power, lived a carefree and smooth life, and also endured the death of several generations of the Zhou family. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Leaving. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Leaving. As for why the empress, despite having children, allowed her adopted son to succeed, there are quite a few theories. However, because her 3 children are living well now, in their 80s and 90s, they are still very carefree, so it is difficult for everyone to speculate on conspiracy theories. Qingzhi is quite interested in these historical stories, but unfortunately, Li Pezi knows very little about them, and Li Zhu's expression is not clear. She inquired about them but didn't find much useful information. However, due to the empress, the status of women has been greatly elevated. Not to mention that women can establish female households, just like men. Studying and taking the imperial examination is also a common thing. Although there are many age and marriage restrictions and policies for female officials, it is still not easy to achieve good results, but it is truly possible to coexist with men in the court. Qingzhi personally felt the government's orders for women here, and was kicked out of the house by the female household while stepping on the lowest threshold. It was the Yan family who paid for it. I estimate we have had a lot of connections. The registered residence of her in Qingzhi has been reported by the Yan family. The county government opened the government office on the 6th day of the year. It's just 2 days since the new registered residence came down. If they have registered residence, she and Qingzhi will have an exit even if they have independent qualifications. The Yan family wanted them to not be members of the Yan family even if they died. They thought it was such an easy thing, but they didn't know that they were no longer the 2 children who recognized and needed before. A few days passed by in a blink of an eye. In the early morning of the 9th day of the Lunar New Year, someone from the Yan family came again. This time, they were not here to warn the Li family. Qingzhi had not yet woken up when she heard the sound of smashing outside. She was quickly awakened because there were no suitable clothes to wear. Subconsciously, she grabbed onto the tattered jacket pressed against the quilt. The room was gloomy, and she couldn't see the surroundings. All she knew was that Mrs. Li had already gotten up and left, and her younger brother was still by her side. Qingzhi is different from her. She has been sleeping very soundly these past few days. Even when she woke up, Qingzhi had already climbed up. "You're not completely cured yet, I'll go down and take a look." As he spoke, the sound of Li Zhu shouting came from outside. "Don't smash it. Don't smash it. That's my mother's vegetable pot, if you want to smash it at me." With a loud bang, the entire cylinder exploded, and Li Zhu burst into tears. Li Pezi quickly went over to pull him. "Get lost. Let you mind your own business. Fuck you." The scene was very chaotic, and Qingzhi quickly put on an old leather jacket to climb down from the Kong. However, before she could make any movement, Li Jue escorted Li Pozi back into the room. There were no lights in the room, and it was difficult to see the situation on both faces. However, Yan Qingzhi keenly felt that Li Jue's breath was very chaotic. After contacting the previous movements, she guessed that he must have been beaten. The indescribable feelings in the hearts of the siblings always feel guilty. The sound of smashing outside continued, but the Li family mother and son didn't say anything and stood at the door to prevent those people from rushing in. Yan Qingzhu's face was very ugly. As he walked up to the two of them, he seemed to smell a hint of blood and was both angry and a bit panicked. "Uncle Zhu, are you injured?" Upon hearing Yan Qingzhu's voice, Li Zhu felt even more aggrieved. He didn't feel that he had done anything wrong. Although his mother had told him about the interests involved, he still didn't want to bow his head. Perhaps some people would call him a fool, but he had his own agenda in his heart. "I'm fine. Don't go out, take good care of yourself." Yan Qingzhi had already wrapped herself tightly in her cold old jacket and crawled out of the warm bed. At the same moment, Yan Qingzhu's cold voice also sounded. "I'll go see what they really want to do. He and Yan Qingzhi have nowhere to go now and will definitely stay here for a while longer. If this problem is not solved, more things will follow." He firmly believed that even if those people started smashing him, they wouldn't dare to hit him, which is why he had such confidence. Otherwise, the Yan family wouldn't have released the two children, and it wouldn't be better to just kill them at home. They are preparing to drive the two children to a dead end, but they don't want to stick their hands at all. The mother and son of the Li family did not expect this floor. As soon as they saw Yan Qingzhu running outside, Li Zhu quickly held down. "Don't go." Li Pozi sighed dejectedly and followed suit. "You let them smash it." At this moment, Yan Qingzhi had already come down from the Kong and walked to Yan Qingzhu in a pair of Li Pozi's shoes. She glanced at Yan Qingzhu in the grey room. "Grandma Li, it's all us who have caused you trouble. Let's leave now and tell them not to smash it anymore." The two of them made the same decision in tacit agreement, and it was already good to be able to survive. The Li family could not have sheltered them for a lifetime, and they would have to leave sooner or later. Although life outside may not be easy, they still cannot calmly watch others suffer for their families. There are not many ways to survive, but since they have come, they don't believe they will die here. It seemed that she felt their determination, and Mrs. Li's mood calmed down a bit. "Don't worry. I have a clear idea about this." She reached out and pressed down on the shoulders of the two children, without any intention of letting them leave. Those people seemed just a warning. After smashing in the yard, they loudly warned the Li family mother and son not to meddle anymore and then left. The four people in the room remained silent for a moment, and only pushed the door open after it was confirmed that those people had left. The yard was a mess, with neatly stacked firewood stacks being pushed down by someone. The frozen vegetables in the pickled vegetable tank were trampled all over the ground, and the dried vegetables hanging under the beams and the stacked hay curtains were torn apart. The courtyard door was pushed down from outside, and a large piece of the courtyard wall was also broken. The siblings of the Yan family feel uncomfortable in their hearts. Even if they are abandoned, they are still forced into such a situation. They also have some guilt towards the Li family and their son, as well as resentment towards the Yan family for killing them all. Li Zhu stared at something with a stiff neck and started crying again. The only calm person was Mrs. Li, who pushed the two children back into the room and led Li Zhu to tidy up the things on the ground. After daybreak, she moved the tattered vegetables into the room and sat on the Kong, carrying a basket while picking dried vegetables, while talking to the two of them about their future plans. "I'm ready to leave with the pillar. We can't stay here anymore. Anyway, the land is also rented, and the house was built with the help of the previous master. It's just right to leave it for you." The two children, dressed in old jackets and helping to pick vegetables, fell silent because they had caused others to leave their homes, which they had never thought of before. "If you don't have a place to go, stay here. If you don't want to stay, just tell me what you want to prepare in the next few days, and I will do my best to help you prepare. Although Li Pezi feels sorry for her two children, she still understands reality very well. Li Zhu's brain is not very good, and he has not yet found a wife in his 20s. The Li family also does not have much money. It is definitely impossible to have such troublesome two children if she wants to have two more. The pillar owes the young master his life, and it was through his care that we, the two of us, were able to have the good days we have today. Now that the pillar has saved you, it can be considered as repaying this love. The two of them already understood what Mrs. Li wanted to say. Qingzhi hesitated for a moment and didn't know how to speak. She turned her head and looked in the direction of her younger brother, just in time to meet Qingzhi. Grandma Li, if you trust me, I will. It seemed that she knew what Qingzhi was going to say, but Mrs. Li waved her hand and interrupted his unfinished words. No need, it was originally our debt of gratitude. We owe our master one life and many years of care. Now that we have saved his two children, we have paid them off. From now on, you will be prosperous, and you will have no connection with our mother and son. Upon hearing what Mrs. Li said, the Yan siblings no longer forced themselves. Even if they had confidence that their days would get better in the future, every word they said at the end of the day was empty talk. Whether sincere or insincere, the Li family mother and son ultimately saved their lives, and it was because of them that they landed in the land they are today. It was you and Uncle Zhu who were so kind that they just saved our siblings. Now that we have left our hometown, we must not forget this great kindness. However, despite our small efforts, there is nothing to repay them both. Therefore, I kowtow 3 heads to you and thank you for your kindness. Upon hearing that the two of them had no intention of following her, Mrs. Li's heart immediately relaxed and her expression softened. Upon seeing this, the two of them respectfully kowtowed to her 3 times, which could be considered a complete settlement of the previous enmity between the two families. This is the first time they have felt kindness after arriving in a different world. They are willing to remember it in their hearts and also willing to comply with each other to resolve this matter. After that, the two families will see each other again. Whether the relationship is good or bad, it all depends on their true intentions. Knowing their decision, Mrs. Li picked up the 2 children and explained them along. Before we leave, I will have Zhu also go to the master's tomb to pay respects. If you want to go, let's go together. I definitely have to go, but the Yan siblings have other things to consider now. Okay, by the way, I forgot to ask you, when are you and Uncle Zhu planning to leave? Thank you too. Let's talk about the main matter now. The pressure on the Yan family is tight, and if the two want to survive, staying here passively is definitely not a long-term plan. Some things should be planned early. After thinking for a moment, Li Pezi said, it's been 15 years. It's also considered a new year. Qingzhi nodded. So, then our siblings may still be bothering us for a few more days. Li Pezi nodded happily and was about to leave, just a few days away. In the following 2 days, someone from Yan's family came knocking on their door. After smashing the yard, they smashed the house. Li Pezi didn't say anything and just let them smash it around. Li Zhu was even sent to the county town to do odd jobs, and he also took the things that couldn't be taken with him to the county town to sell for money. The Li family doesn't have much savings, so if you really want to leave, you need to prepare more. These past few days, Mrs. Li made a whole outfit for her siblings. In addition to sewing a thick leather jacket with a torn leather jacket, she also made a pair of leather pants for each of them. Neither of them was polite to Mrs. Li, and they asked her to help sew 2 sets of cotton jackets and hats. When my health improved a bit, I started running outside every day. As they began to go out and walk, their appetite also grew larger and larger. Li Pezi looked at Qingzhi and saw that she could match the appetite of Li Zhu, an adult man who did physical work. She was even more grateful that she had not made the decision to keep them by her side. A few days passed quickly, and in a blink of an eye, it was 15. I heard that there is also the Lantern Festival in the county town on this day, but it has nothing to do with Qingzhi. She looked at the wooden carriage of the Li family, which had not much luggage in total, and felt an indescribable sadness in her heart. She thought she was the same way back then, carrying her own bedding, changing clothes with her few items, and taking the bus to move out of her uncle's house in this era. There is no land of one's own, perhaps it is no different from living under someone else's protection. Sister, why don't I stay? Seeing her like this, Qingzhi was very uneasy. Qingzhi shook her head, patted his shoulder, and instantly became full of fighting spirit. Don't worry. When did your older sister embarrass you about the fight? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Beginning of Resistance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The beginning of resistance. Early in the morning of the 16th day of the first lunar month, as soon as it was dawn, Qingzhi set up a formation at the entrance of the Yan family. She was wearing a large tattered leather jacket, holding a wooden bucket in her hand. Ladles of chicken blood poured onto the gate of the Yan family, and the loud noise immediately alarmed the gatekeeper of the Yan family. The gatekeeper was short and thin, somewhat old-fashioned. He was a relative of Yan Maochuan's stepmother, the Zhou family, and could still see the same harshness as the Zhou family between his eyebrows and eyes. He didn't know why, so he hastily put on his clothes and ran towards the door. As he ran, he didn't forget to shout loudly, "Here we are." In such a courtyard, the gate is usually not open, and there won't be anyone knocking on the gate early in the morning. He only considers it urgent and doesn't dare to delay it at all. The small door next to her opened, and Qingzhi waited in front of the door when she heard the commotion. The old gatekeeper held a small lamp and squinted at it. Before he could see clearly, Qingzhi poured a bucket of blood and water on his head and face. "Who? What are you doing?" "Poop poop." "Ah poop. What is this?" He fixed his gaze and only then did he recognize Qingzhi, his face instantly turning ugly. "Is that you?" Qingzhi. Qingzhi's face was cold and stern, with a high and mighty figure. She was wearing a tattered leather jacket, not tall, but with a straight back. She was not at all angry with the gatekeeper, and she also wanted to throw the bucket of chicken blood mixed with water onto the gatekeeper's face. The gatekeeper was extremely angry, but instinctively made him quickly dodge on his side. In my memory, the gatekeeper tried to please the old lady of the Yan family, but there were many who were difficult to speak of. Now, seeing him like this, she was also very happy in her heart. "That's right, it's me. Hurry up and ask the master of the Yan family to come out and talk to me, otherwise what will be spilled on the Yan family's door later is not blood, but fecal soup." Speaking, she didn't forget to expose the wooden crates and barrels that she had moved early behind her, so that the gatekeeper with a head exposed could take a closer look. The gatekeeper wiped the blood off his face and sneered. "Don't even look at your own virtues. All right. Don't you want to see the master? Wait for me." As he spoke, he flashed into the door and was about to shout for someone to come out. However, based on Qingzhi's speculation, the probability of calling out to the Yan family master is not high, and the thug is still around. Therefore, she added another sentence. "I advise you to listen to me the best, otherwise something will happen soon. Don't blame me for not reminding you." This kind of painless and harsh words are not a problem for the gatekeeper, and he may not even be able to listen to them when he is extremely angry. Sure enough, before Qingzhi could finish pouring her blood, the long-term workers of the Yan family were already gathering and clamoring towards the direction of the gate. Yan's family is prosperous and has some small money in their hands. In addition to 5 or 6 servants, they also support more than 10 long-term workers. During the Chinese New Year period in previous years, most of the long-term workers had to go back to celebrate. However, this year, due to the incident with Qingzhi, they all stayed behind to cause trouble at the Li family. Therefore, at this time, they are still in the Yan family. Qingzhi was already prepared for this. She calmly splashed the blood and water behind her, and then began to pour feces on the door of the Yan family. The gate of the Yan family is black, with door studs, and it doesn't look like an ordinary farmer. The blood and water splashed on it are not conspicuous and have no impact. However, the effect of splashing fecal water is different. She was throwing her energy as several long-term workers rushed out of the side door with hoes and shovels, looking very fierce. Even if the opponent was a child as big as Qingzhi, they were the same. Perhaps when they were at the Li family, these people had some reservations and may not have really hit her hard, but when someone hit them at the door, the nature of the situation had already changed. The people of the Yan family can allow her to die silently outside, but cannot accept her dying together with them through such intense means. Qingzhi was already prepared, her eyes narrowed, and she quickly retreated. Just as these people rushed towards her, she used the water ladle that had just splashed feces to scoop out a bucket of water from another bucket that had been placed under her feet for half a day. Without hesitation, she directly splashed it into the other person's eyes. Some people react quickly and quickly close their eyes, but some people don't have time to close their eyes. They are infiltrated by some liquid, and their eyes are suddenly hot and swollen. They quickly wipe their faces with their sleeves, but the more they wipe, the more uncomfortable it becomes. This is the concentrated chili water that my aunt has personally boiled all day. I'll give you a good taste. Chili peppers were torn off the eaves of the Li family by these long-term workers a few days ago. If they can't eat them, they can only be used as waste. During her speech, Qingzhi didn't forget to fill in the gaps between those who were still rushing forward. One by one, that precise and agile hand made several people unprepared. Who would have thought this child would be so damaged suddenly? Several long workers' hoes and pickaxes fell to the ground, all groaning and covering their eyes. They were in excruciating pain, reaching out to grab the snow under the courtyard wall and pressing it against their own eyes. Qingzhi wouldn't have missed such a good opportunity. She picked up a short stick from one side and gave everyone a fierce beating. There was a person with a bad temper who would pull Qingzhi's stick even with his eyes closed. Qingzhi let out a cold snort and let him pull. As soon as the person got started, they were hit by a small nail that slipped in and scratched their hands. The nail went deep and only made a head, making it difficult to kill the person, but it was too easy to scratch the person. The person endured the pain, thinking that if they snatched the stick from Qingzhi's hand, the other party would no longer be able to rely on them. However, to their surprise, Qingzhi's strength was so great that even if he pulled and pulled, he could not snatch the stick from Qingzhi's hand. As the two tugged and tugged, the person's attention was drawn to the stick and he didn't notice it. Qingzhi held the stick in one hand and sent it in the direction he was pulling. At the same time, her free hand quickly took out a small ball filled with quicklime from her tattered leather jacket pocket and threw it directly into his face. He couldn't have imagined that a child would have such a vulgar trick and be hit straight on the spot. Quicklime was flying, and a layer of it floated all over his face and neck. That small ball was made of pig intestines. It was a small piece that she had filled with gas and quicklime, and then tightly tied it. It broke with just one drop, with a success rate of up to 90%. The chilly water on his face, which had not yet been wiped off, mixed with quicklime and gradually began to heat up. He closed his eyes and didn't know what hit him, so he was so scared that he quickly grabbed it with his hand. Qingzhi squinted her eyes and immediately seized the opportunity to fly her legs, causing the person to have a dead end. In addition, the quicklime on her face had already heated up along with the chilly water, releasing the pain of the chilly water to its maximum intensity. He instantly lost his temper in pain. This series of combos, but in the blink of an eye. Qingzhi knocked down one and swiftly attacked the remaining long-term workers. Her strength was still not enough, so she could only seize the opportunity and catch these people off guard. Taking advantage of their illness, she killed them. The waving of the short stick in her hand, full of vigor and vitality, required no skill at all, and could roll these blindfolded long workers on the ground. She didn't keep her hand, beating and cursing at the same time. Aren't you good at smashing things? Aren't you bullying the Li family? You want to drive me away? No way. Auntie, if I don't recover those debts today, I'll hang myself directly in front of your Yan family's door. Yan Qingzhi's words were filled with tears and blood, and her determination to hang herself in front of the Yan family gate made even the gatekeepers eavesdropping through the gate tremble with fear. His hands trembled slightly, feeling that the current situation exceeded his expectations. He murmured in his mouth. Crazy, crazy. Yan Qingzhi is crazy. I don't know who Yan Qingzhi said this to, but her hitting movements didn't stop. She was just a long-term worker, not a professional thug. When she hit her like this, she immediately wilted and retreated, wanting to get 2 less blows. During the process, someone kicked over 2 of the wooden pots she brought and spilled feces all over her body, causing her to feel unlucky and infuriating Yan Qingzhi. It's not easy to turn feces into fecal water at this temperature. She didn't even sleep last night and just tinkered with these things. A group of people covered their eyes all the way, running around until the second young master of the Yan family came out, and Yan Qingzhi finally put away her stick and stood in front of the Yan family's door. Several long-term workers quickly squeezed in through the side door, making the second young master who passed by nauseous enough. The second young master of the Yan family was born to an old lady of the Yan family. He is 27 years old and named Yan Maoxia. He is fair and clean, with average appearance and not high stature. He is a bit chubby and doesn't look like the old man of Yan, but more like the old lady of Yan. Yan Maoxia pulled out a blue handkerchief from her sleeve and frowned, covering her nose. A group of trash. Upon hearing his voice, the long worker, in addition to being flustered, did not forget to salute. Second young master. Go on, go on. It's useless. As he spoke, he walked unsteadily to Yan Qingzhi and looked down at her from a high position. Speak up. What can I do for you? Although Yan Qingzhi looked up, she did not delay her disdain for him. Looking for you. Is it even suitable for a filling student? Upon hearing these words, Yan Maoxia was about to explode, but before he could move, Yan Qingzhi jumped up directly. Ah! With a sound, she gave Yan Maoxia a farewell note. The movements were both urgent and fierce, and due to Yan Maoxia's carelessness, he instinctively wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. Yan Maoxia had not yet organized her rebuttal, and she never expected that Yan Qingzhi would not even let him say anything. Instead, she resorted to such tactics directly against him without any defense and was kicked hard by her. That's sour and refreshing. It's amazing. The painful, twisted, helpless, and oppressive sound of Yan Maoxia's sour and refreshing stimulation suddenly echoed through the entire sky. I originally wanted to curse Yan Qingzhi again, but now I can't say a word. But who knows, this is not even the most tragic. Yan Qingzhi's kick was obviously not a final kill, it was just a move. Just as he was covering his key area and bending down to pinch his legs, Yan Qingzhi boldly extended her right hand, with 2 slender fingers forked apart, extending parallel and running straight towards his eyes. At that moment, Yan Qingzhi's fingers were unstoppable, displaying a ruthless and decisive temperament, as if she had already disregarded any consequences. New book period, seeking collection, investment, recommendation. The book will definitely be completed, please rest assured to invest. Bow, thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Old Man Yan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Old Man Yan. Yan Maoxia was so scared by this combo that her heart was about to fly out. She screamed and finally closed her eyes in time for 2 fingers to enter his eyes. However, this piercing still made his eyeballs ache, indicating that when Yan Qingzhi took action, she really ran to poke him blind. He screamed loudly, one hand covering his belly and the other hand covering his eyes, cursing and wanting to escape. Little beast! You wait for me. Wait for me, I'll have someone kill you. Yan Maoxia was used to his superior position, where had he suffered such a loss? His nose and tears flowed profusely, and he squeezed out 3 words from between his teeth, gritting his teeth and preparing to say a few harsh words before leaving. Unfortunately, before he could say what he was thinking, Yan Qingzhi's 3rd consecutive session had already arrived. Taking advantage of Yan Maoxia's lack of strength to resist, she gritted her teeth and covered her eyes, pretending to be blind. She half opened her arms and exerted force on her wrists, directly giving Yan Maoxia, who was about the height of her buttocks, a wrist-piercing ear. This brought a strong wind, and under an inch of force, Yan Maoxia's eardrums were not injured, but it directly shook his head. Yan Maoxia's face twisted for an instant, and her mind buzzed for a moment. Her curled-up figure swayed slightly, and the color of her clothes darkened. Before Yan Qingzhi could take another move, she collapsed directly at her feet. Yan Qingzhi did not expect that her first move, which she had practiced for several years, would be so fierce. She cursed Yan Maoxia for being a weak chicken in her heart, but there was no trace on her face. She even stepped on Yan Maoxia's head and stood there with her head held high, watching the gatekeeper shrink inside the door, afraid to come out. The atmosphere suddenly quieted down, and Yan Er's body still twitched slightly due to pain. The dark color beneath him became increasingly apparent, indicating that he had lost control. Yan Qingzhi's actions were light and heavy, and Yan Maoxia's situation was just a coincidence. In fact, it would take a while to recover, with dizziness and vomiting for a few days at most. However, if the physical injury is easily healed, the shadow in the heart will not know when it will heal. Without any guidance, if someone mocks you for a few more days, you probably won't be able to recover for a lifetime. But Yan Qingzhi had no sympathy for him at all. Considering her current identity, this person was also one of the murderers who killed her father. She did not directly kill him because she was worried that the future would not come to an end. It was not worth risking the lives of her siblings for such a person. Yan Qingzhi was brewing her emotions, speculating that after this level, the highlight was about to come. She needed to adjust her emotions and not let herself reveal any flaws. In no time, the old man of the Yan family finally walked out of the side door with square steps, and the old lady of the Yan family followed closely behind. Yan, an old man in his 50s, has 3-dimensional facial features, gray hair, a beard, and a slender figure. He is dressed in a blue cloud pattern jacket, covered in a gray rat skin cloak, and leaning on a finely crafted teak cane. Standing there, he doesn't look like an old lady from a farmer's house at all. He looked at his son who had been stepped on by Yan Qingzhi in the ground, his expression condensed and he didn't speak. He just raised his right hand slightly and slowly rubbed the jade ring finger of his left hand. He stood in opposition to Yan Qingzhi from afar, silent as he gazed at her with a towering aura, as if he was looking at something dirty that couldn't be seen on the table. Yan Qingzhi didn't do what he wanted, understanding that the other party was trying to suppress her head in terms of momentum. Her fierce determination in her eyes was even stronger, and she didn't lose sight of Yan Lao too when he met her. The old man Yan has been successful for many years and has accumulated a lot of power, but Yan Qingzhi's years of fighting have not been in vain. The line of sight collided, surprisingly not on par. The old man's vigilance gradually rose in his heart, and he began to guess in his heart what the little boy in front of him was playing. Just as his thoughts flipped, the old lady of the Yan family, Zhou Shi, who was following behind him, suddenly saw the figure at Yan Qingzhi's feet clearly. She was not as cautious as Yan Lao. After years of honing Yan Qingzhi, she was quite bloated. Her drooping triangular eyes, which were already old, suddenly widened and surpassed Yan Lao in 2 steps. Her round body rushed forward like a shell, cursing loudly as she approached. "You, the bereaved star who conquers your father and mother, dare not touch my son without looking at your tattered body." Mrs. Yan is not tall, chubby, and has a very harsh face, which makes people feel that all the excess fat on her body is horizontal at first glance. Although she tried her best to dress up, it has to be said that from her appearance, she really doesn't match the old man Yan. Seeing her rushing towards her, Qingzhi didn't say a word and splashed a bucket of fecal water on her feet, with a few drops even splashing on the corners of her skirt and shoes, causing her to curse in a sharp voice. Ah! Qingzhi, you little slut with a rotten heart and lungs. Look, I won't peel off your skin. She has been carrying the money of an old lady for her whole life. When was she so disobedient, especially when she looked down upon and despised the Qingzhi, who had always allowed her to rub and flatten the Yan family's mansion? The hatred towards Qingzhi and the Yan family immediately surged in my heart, even ignoring my son lying on the ground. You little slut, I'm going to peel off your skin, ah ah. Qingzhi narrowed her eyes and a fierce light appeared. Peel off my skin. I see you dare to. After speaking, he waved the stick in his hand and unequivocally attacked Zhou's stomach. Zhou was caught off guard when she hit her. She was directly scolded and her face turned pale. She stumbled back 2 steps and almost fell. This almost blew up her lungs. Morning Gate Star, shameless. I'm going to sue you. I'm suing you for disrespect and unfilial piety, let the government beat you up. Listening to her cheap mouth, Qingzhi couldn't bear to argue with her. To argue with such a person is to compare who is shameless. Qingzhi admits that she cannot reach the level of the other person and can only find some balance on her fists, feet, and sticks. The old lady of the Yan family has average hands. On ability, except for her increasingly loud scolding voice, she has no resistance at all. She can only dodge Qingzhi's stick while screaming in a sharp and piercing voice, which is extremely piercing. People around her feel that their ears are buzzing with vibration. Qingzhi is no exception, but she is a ruthless person. The more the other party yells, the harder she hits with her stick. After knocking down a few times, the old lady shouted and ran towards the yard. The old man Yan looked at him awkwardly and angrily. When he first came out, he looked at Qingzhi with a strange aura. Speaking of this granddaughter, it seemed like he hadn't seen her in a long time. Even when the siblings were kicked out, he couldn't get by for the sake of face and didn't personally take a look. It was only because the gatekeeper spoke that he realized he had such a granddaughter. In fact, he hesitated for a moment when he first thought of Mrs. Yan's desperate methods in the past few days. He is also somewhat dissatisfied with the old lady of the Yan family. After all, she is his grandson and granddaughter, treated like an enemy, always making him feel embarrassed. However, no matter how good the unpopular grandchildren are, they are no better than the few sons in front of them. After Zhou married, she gave birth to 6 sons for him, and her youngest son was a material for studying. At the age of 10, she passed the child test and became a child. Now, at the age of 16, she has outstanding literary talent, and this year's annual test is also highly anticipated. Thinking that at the age of only 16, old 7 was about to become a scholar, old Yan refused to go to the trouble of old Yan's wife for the sake of his 2 disliked grandchildren. The Yan family has always had the intention of changing their family, but with the increasing number of scholars, it has become increasingly difficult for them to enter official positions through the imperial examinations. Only geniuses are allowed to participate. If the Yan family can produce such a person, there is nothing he cannot abandon. Not to mention making Mrs. Yan happy, if Yan Maowen can really succeed, he can even send Mrs. Yan to heaven. And now he is hiding the sky with only one hand in the village. The 2 children have independent registered residence, and have no relationship with Yan's family in general. He has never been on the genealogy. Even if he dies, no one will care. In a few more years, it will be even more difficult to investigate, and naturally there will be no hidden dangers left. Therefore, he also allowed Mrs. Yan's series of actions to be tolerated. However, he never expected that Qingzhi, who had lived in the Yan family for so many years and had always been like a bun, would have such a strong and resolute personality that even a child of half would dare to come knocking at him alone. Mrs. Yan screamed and was beaten back by Qingzhi. Then he shouted loudly and urged his sons and servants to come out quickly. After a moment of thought, old Yen finally realized that if he didn't do anything else, the face of the Yen family would be ruined. Damn it! Stop it! Speaking, he stopped in front of Qingzhi and blocked everyone in the side door behind him. You scoundrel, so shameful of the Yen family, do you deserve your deceased father? Old Yan's aura is fully open, his mouth is like hitting someone's pain point, trying to directly suppress them in righteousness. But before he could finish speaking, he was scolded back by Qingzhi. Joke. What am I sorry for? I've been working as a cow and horse for the Yen family since I was born, and I can't even afford a full meal. What am I sorry for? Qingzhi has fought with people many times, and they are all taller, stronger, and stronger than her. At first, I was still influenced by people's aura, but later on, I was no longer influenced by anyone. How could you speak such rebellious and unfilial words? It's a waste of being a woman. The Yen family provided you with food and drink, raised you, and even if you have some shame, you cannot humiliate your parents and ancestors like this. It shows that your character is like this. You are cunning and have no manners. Fortunately, the Yen family expelled you early on. Otherwise, I really don't know what kind of trouble you can cause in the future. He said this very seriously. In ancient times, the concept of clan was deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Even if the great Zhao dynasty opened up, it could not escape the network of relationships. If someone else heard this, their mind would definitely be stirred and worried about their future life after leaving the clan. But Qingzhi understood that what the other party said was scary was just nonsense, and the conflict between the two sides had long been irreconcilable. Moreover, the Yen family's siblings made jokes about being expelled from their family, and the two of them had never actually entered the Yen family tree. From beginning to end, I never became a member of Yan's family. How could those nonsense come from? But it's just scaring the child without knowledge. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Didn't play well back in the year. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 didn't play well back in the year. You also deserve to judge my character. Qingzhi thinks this is really a joke. When facing such a person, she is really not afraid. You don't even look at your own conduct. Yen Lao too was instantly pricked by Qingzhi's tone, and his surface martial arts, which he could have persevered with, were not far from breaking the martial arts at this moment. Qingzhi knew too well what people like him didn't want to hear the most, so she opened her mouth and stabbed at his fatal weakness. As for the family, if you let the house-filling process persecute your legitimate son, you will be held accountable to your parents who took care of your marriage, and to your humble and filial eldest son. You are unjust, merciless, ungrateful, and inferior to animals. As for people, you rely on your own wealth and land, roam the countryside, cause trouble to the people, be unjust, have a human face and animal heart, and are better off than pigs and dogs. In private, you cannot connect with your village neighbors, enjoy flattery, be greedy and selfish. For Dukyu, you have violated the teachings of the Empress, violated human ethics, and acted in reverse. But with some land in hand, a few ignorant fools who can be deceived will flatter and really think they are an old master. I don't even look at your own virtues. Look at all the bad things you've done before, and you still feel like a person. If it weren't for planting your own land, you would be nothing in their hearts. Qingzhi's words hit the nail on the head. It's like tearing apart the face that old Yen has maintained over the years. Old Yen has always regarded himself as a landlord and likes to go out for a walk every day. He likes to be flattered and flattered by others the most, but unfortunately, he is also selfish and unwilling to even do some facade work. He has a spectrum in his heart and understands who he is. But, to be clear, there are some things that cannot be said by others at all. He relied on his vanity and flamboyance to maintain a strong aura, but was shattered by Qingzhi's blow, and could no longer display the calm and composed demeanor of an expert he had just shown. Damn it! Damn it! It seems that I let you go, it's really a cheap deal for you. You little beast who doesn't know filial piety, propriety, righteousness, and shame. Letting you go also tarnishes the reputation of our Yen family. Today, I'm going to kill you. This time, he no longer pretended or stood out as a spectator, hoping that Katsuya would not get involved. Those who are dressed in hypocritical attire, once torn off by others, only reveal an ignorant and selfish ugly soul inside. Qingzhi's nervousness just now suddenly dissipated in half. There is not much difference in personality between the old man Yen and the ones they scrutinize. Underneath his inflated appearance, he only conceals his inferiority complex and timidity. Before the person could enter, the hollow cane was raised high and knocked towards Qingzhi. His cane, Qingzhi, has heard of a name called family law. It is said that the old man Yen used it specifically to strike his disobedient children and grandchildren, but unfortunately, the most he struck was still his eldest son, who had suffered greatly and remained silent. Born with enough favoritism, after death there is even less affection. Seeing him like this, Qingzhi understood that her goal had been achieved, sneered, stopped, stood there without hesitation, and looked up straight. Beat me. Beat me. Anyway, I'm dead. Yuhuan doesn't even need to take the imperial examination anymore. If I were to exchange my lowly life for your family's eternal mud legs, I wouldn't be happy in time. Beat me. Her words were full of loopholes, and the old man Yen didn't believe them at all. He squeezed out the 4 words Qingzhi had just said about him from between his teeth. You deserve it too. Old Yen took 2 more steps forward, and the distance between the two was infinitely close, making old Yen look down and clearly see Qingzhi's cold eyes. The ferocity and determination in it are undisguised, as if there is no fear of life and death at all. However, no one would notice that her knuckles, holding the short stick in her hand behind her, instantly turned white. I came today, so I'm not planning to go back alive. Your Yen family has already spared our siblings. We don't want you guys to feel better either. 2 words resounded loudly, carrying a fearless momentum and directly impacting the heart of old Yen. Qingzhi's eyes were red, her cheeks' muscles clenched tightly, and her emaciated face showed no signs of childlike innocence, only the madness of dying together. The old man was startled by Qingzhi's gaze. The surging hatred seemed to be on the verge of being suppressed, and only a little bit dissipated, making the people standing by shiver all over. He could feel that the child in front of him really had no way out, and he really wanted to pull him and the entire Yen family into the water. His hand couldn't help but pause for a moment. It was also at this moment that Qingzhi said something that shocked him immensely. My younger brother is currently in the county town. If he doesn't see me, he will be hanged directly at the entrance of Yuhuan Academy. Before I die, I have to dig out all the dirty things in the sewer of your Yen family and tell them in public. Let Mr. Yuhuan and his classmates take a good look at how your Yen family is hiding dirt and grime. My dear father is merciless and unjust, unable to distinguish right from wrong. My mother is cruel and ruthless, persecuting the legitimate descendants. A litter full of fierce and ruthless beasts. He said Yuhuan still wants to take the imperial examination or become an official. Damn it. Let's go to the next life. Qingzhi's emotions became more and more excited as she spoke, her forehead veins bulging and her blood boiling. When it came to the critical moment, she even spat on the face of Yen Lao Tu, who was just a stone's throw away from her. When she spoke these words, her anger was real, and the shame engraved in her bones had accompanied her for many days and nights. With just a few words, those suppressed and dull memories had already emerged before her. When she was 13 years old, she also went to her uncle's house to ask for her parents' inheritance. At that time, she didn't even enter the door, and the person standing in front of her was also her grandfather. But at that time she tightly gripped her pants with nervous hands, but couldn't say a word. Every time since then, when the siblings couldn't even sustain their lives due to lack of money, she would think of that silent morning, the gloomy hallway. The scene was so clear, she remembered every subtle expression on the faces of her uncle and grandfather clearly. She had fantasized about this scene countless times in her mind, every position, every gaze, and every breath of words she uttered, all of which were a summary of her years of resentment towards her own incompetence. The old man Yen will never know that Qingzhi's emotions have been brewing for a full 7 years for the outbreak of this moment today. He tried several times to lift his cane but couldn't fall. Looking at the red eyes of the child in front of him, he felt a little fear in his heart. His body swayed slightly, not even realizing it himself. Although he didn't believe that the two big kids could do such a thing, looking into each other's eyes was filled with undisguised hatred and madness, which made him clearly feel that what the other person said must be true. They are going to make him feel uncomfortable today, let him go to hell with them, to avenge their behavior of tacitly allowing Zhou to kill their father and driving their siblings to a dead end. In this grand showdown, Yen Lao too completely lost. His thoughts were no longer to appease Qingzhi, but to suddenly think of many other questions. If Yen Maowen loses the significance of the imperial examination, what does it matter how many sons there are? What is the point of letting Zhou Shi kill his eldest son? In the future, won't I still be trapped in this small village, repeating an unchanged and mundane life day after day, year after year, with no hope of success? The two of them looked at each other, and the air froze. After a long silence, Qingzhi's fingers holding the short stick behind her trembled slightly, but there was only an inexplicable mockery on her face, breaking the current deadlock. The meaningless questions of the old man suddenly dissipated, and his whole body suddenly woke up from this inexplicable state. His forehead was sweating with cold sweat, and his heart was filled with fear and his own fear just now. However, years of dominance made him unable to bow down to Qingzhi no matter what. He squinted his eyes and moved his arms slightly. Just as he was about to make a move, he saw Qingzhi's smile immediately fade away. The old man Yen finally realized that Qingzhi's smile just now didn't reach the bottom of his eyes, it was more of a cold and indifferent expression. At this moment, Qingzhi's voice rang out again, her tone suddenly changed, and her whole body seemed to be empty. However, what she said made old Yen even more creepy. Anyway, we can't survive anymore. There's nothing wrong with being able to support your family before death. As soon as these words were spoken, old Yan's hair stood on end. He suddenly felt that Qingzhi might have had other thoughts before coming, but after saying these words, the other party seemed to suddenly feel that this was also good. Now that the New Year's examination is only a month away, if something happens at this time, the examiners and students from other places will not hesitate to speak up. They will definitely be able to spread the name of your Yen family to various places in Dezhou. You said that the old master would immediately become famous throughout the country. He allowed himself to fill houses and kill his parents, and persecuted his grandchildren, causing them to commit suicide at the entrance of his uncle's academy. Is this story stimulating? And he said, Maowen, with such parents, how can his character be so good? In the future, your Yen family will be criticized by thousands of people because of our siblings. Those Yen Maowen classmates who have been implicated in fame because of your Yen family will not let you go. Think about it this way, it's not bad for us either. Qingzhi did a lot of homework before coming, and everything she said was by no means sensational. The annual examination has always required students to be guaranteed, and the imperial examination system in Dezhou is extremely strict. In addition to being guaranteed by Lin Sheng, 5 classmates who took the same exam at the same time are also required to jointly guarantee. Moreover, according to the regulations of the Dezhou imperial examination, it is not allowed for 6 people to form a group as a guarantor. If a candidate encounters an accident, the other 5 people will all be implicated. It is not an exaggeration to directly bring up a group of people who are implicated, including those who have opposing relationships. For the court, since there were many students in Dezhou, even those who died 1,000 or 800 would not be injured. On the contrary, under severe punishment, there were fewer forced cases. Since the establishment of the country, there have been even half of the fraud cases compared to the early days of the dynasty. Although bad conduct is different from fraud, those who are implicated will not affect the imperial examination as a result. If they become officials later on, this will definitely be a stain. The old man's hands trembled. Qingzhi also sneered along, her voice light and indifferent. Don't think I'm trying to scare you, Qingzhi, and I have no way out. We'll just die, we're on the brink of extinction, so naturally we're not afraid of anything. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Old Man Yan's Obsession. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Old Man Yan's obsession. The muscles on Yan's face twitched, and the cane in his hand couldn't fall or be retracted. The look in Qingzhi's eyes was complex and inexplicable. Qingzhi felt that the other party was gradually calming down, but she didn't think there was any problem. Only when an opponent regained their sanity and was intimidated, would they consider gains and losses, and things would move towards the direction she expected. She doesn't mind giving old Yan some time. However, before the confrontation between the two could come to an end, Zhou came out to cause trouble. She was still thinking about her eldest son, lying on the ground in the icy and snowy weather, and didn't know what she had been beaten up by Qingzhi. After she returned, she rushed out again with a few sons and servants in just a moment. Upon hearing the sound, Qingzhi immediately took a few steps back, turned around and picked up the wooden basin beside her. Ignoring her disgust, she threw it directly in the direction of the door. The nearest old man Yan's pupils shrank and he reacted the fastest. He cursed in his heart and quickly withdrew his hand to avoid it. He managed to avoid the biggest damage, but because he blocked the other people's line of sight, the people behind him couldn't dodge and were directly thrown in the face. A pot of slightly yellow fecal water with a hint of temperature drew a full arc in mid-air, and Zhou was the first to accept half of it, while the rest evenly divided the remaining part. The scene was chaotic for a moment, with screams incessantly in her ears, and a few who couldn't bear it were already nauseous. After all, Qingzhi was worried that the damage from splashing on her pants was not enough, so she rushed towards her face. Whether someone is open-mouthed or not is not within her scope of consideration. Qingzhi threw the wooden basin onto the ground and then picked up the bucket on one side. While picking it up, she accidentally stepped on Yan Maoxia lying on the ground. This step was so severe that Yan Maoxia, who had not yet fully awakened, twitched twice and showed signs of waking up. Qingzhi noticed and splashed a bucket of fecal water at the sons and servants of the Yan family. She then used the wooden bucket to give Yan Lauer, who was about to get up, a jolt in the back of his head and knocked him unconscious again. Mrs. Yan screamed and shouted, and the sons of the Yan family also had dark faces. Old Yan had some filth hanging on his body, standing on the side that was out of reach, with a gloomy expression. He calmed down and his mind flew. Awakened from Qingzhi's spiritual oppression, he immediately understood that if Qingzhi came alone, there must be some demand, and as for whether to hang or not, it was just a last resort. The method of using two children may seem safe, but upon careful consideration, there are countless flaws. This made his previously timid heart swell again, and he couldn't help but underestimate Qingzhi a bit. It was just that he was young and full of courage. If the Yan family doesn't care about their face and simply and rudely grabs Qingzhi to the county town, they can create a name and use it to blackmail Qingzhi, without fear of him not appearing. If you care about your face and want to act low-key, please calm down Qingzhi for now. When she goes to the county to find Qingzhi, it is not impossible for the two of them to have a pot of tea. If the energy is greater, hold down Qingzhi here and quickly arrange for people to catch Qingzhi in the county town. The county town is just such a big place, mobilizing some networks. It's just a 7-year-old child. No matter how much you think, you can really avoid it. The old man hesitated between a few thoughts. Every one of them carries risks, and face is definitely important. Yan Maowen will continue to develop in the future, and they do not have tremendous energy. The Yan family is a big clan in Dezhou, but that is the main lineage. Their branch has long been in decline, and even if they live in a corner, they are all being promoted. Being too flamboyant is not beneficial to them. If Yan Qingzhi is an outsider and comes knocking on her door like this, nothing can be done too much. But Yan Qingzhi is his eldest granddaughter, and Yan Qingzhu is his eldest grandchild. Not to mention that they were driven to a dead end by the Yan family. Even if it was their misconduct, speaking out would be the fault of the Yan family. It seems that the least costly way is to first agree to Yan Qingzhi's conditions, and then catch both children when she meets Yan Qingzhu in the county town. But in this way, he really doesn't feel happy in his heart. Moreover, the retaliatory inflation did not make Yan Qingzhi wary enough, but instead made him feel that the child's ability was nothing more than that. She has already thrown all the cards she can use, and what ways can she fight against herself and the entire speaker afterwards? The old man squinted his eyes and looked at Yan Qingzhi, who was swinging lime and a stick at the same time, his heart repeatedly jumping between directly grasping the other party and obeying their conditions. Yan Qingzhi is thin and small in stature, but when it comes to fighting, she is really fierce. Whenever there is a chance, she will knock on the most vulnerable parts of people, knowing that she is small and weak, not leaving any hands. Even if a stick pokes people's eyes, her hands will not be soft. Several spoiled sons and daughters-in-law of the Yan family were helpless for a moment. This is completely different from Yan Qingzhi's previous performance, which made Yan old man subconsciously suspect that the other party was well prepared and didn't say anything, and that he really had a will to die. Only by not being afraid of death can one disregard everything and the consequences. Only by not being afraid of death can such energy burst out. He suddenly breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Soft ones were afraid of hard ones were afraid of horizontal ones, and horizontal ones were afraid of nothing. She is Yan Qingzhi, and now for old Yan, she is just a carefree person. As Yan Maowen's annual trial approached, it was his hope, and he dared not take any risk of destroying Yan Maowen. The anger in old Yan's eyes gradually dissipated into a fierce contemplation, and his decision was finally placed in the direction that the Yan siblings were looking forward to. After much thought, the old man felt a tightness in his chest and took a deep breath before calming down. Forget it. What's this anger worth? No matter how strong they are just two children. When they catch someone, they can clean up as they want. This time, he overestimated the Zhou family and underestimated the two children. When he personally takes action, such mistakes will definitely not be made again. At this point in his thinking, he thrust his crutch onto the ground and let out a loud shout from the enraged Dantian. Don't make any fuss. Upon hearing this sound, although Yan Qingzhi didn't show any signs on her face, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. She had already fallen into a disadvantage, and the old man's loud shout also saved her a lot of physical suffering. The sons of the Yan family were beaten up and became furious. They wanted to pretend not to hear, so they slapped Yan Qingzhi a few times before speaking. However, the old man Yan had already made his cane tremble on the cobblestone road. I told you to stop. Can't you hear me? The sons of the Yan family haven't been scolded by old Yan in front of everyone for many years, and their faces don't look good. However, seeing their own father angry, they can only take back their slaps. Yan Qingzhi was not foolish. She saw the old man Yan's plan and knew that the other party had already taken advantage of it. Of course, she would not make trouble out of it. As soon as she saw several people withdrawing their actions, she also retreated with caution, without any intention of shouting anymore. Zhou did not hear Yan Qingzhi's previous words, only thinking that Yan Lao was still favoring the big house family, and his eyes were about to burst out. 2 steps forward, howling and ready to take action. All right you. All right you. You dare not fight, I dare to fight, see if I don't kill you shameless little slut today. Yan Qingzhi frowned and immediately clenched the stick in her hand. But before she could take action, the voice of old Yan's test rang not far from Mrs. Yan's side. Go ahead. I'll see how you hit it. Mrs. Yan's twisted expression immediately became even more twisted. After probing twice, she finally didn't dare to disobey Mr. Yan. But she has been used to being domineering for many years, dare not take action or speak up. She ignored the feces on the ground, crossed her legs, and instantly sat on the ground crying and robbing the ground. My fate is hard. I have given birth to children for you, taken care of your family affairs, and worked hard to serve you for 30 years, 30 years. When you grow old, you still treat me as an outsider and focus solely on that short-lived bereaved star. What evil have I done? Let me crash into the gate of his old Yan family, which is truly his wish. Old San. Go and shout out Old Seven, let him come and see his mother for the last time, and save her a while. Old Yan's heart was biased, he didn't feel that Zhou Shi was making a mistake at all. He even wanted her to make more noise and put pressure on Yan Qingzhi to break her rhythm. I don't want to say that the old lady is so foolish, she just wants to lead things to the worst. Especially Yan Maowen, it's okay if he doesn't come out. Once he comes out, he's going to drive the Yan family to a dead end. On one side is the imperial examination, on the other side is the mother. Yan Maowen is already 1,000 mistakes without saying anything. The old man's hands trembled with anger, realizing that letting the situation continue would not benefit him at all. It was better to catch both children first as the current urgency of delay. He took 2 steps forward, ignoring the feces and blood all over Mrs. Yan's body. He reached out and slapped her in the face. The slap was extremely loud, as if it had hit Zhou's soul directly through his body, causing him to be stunned on the spot and unable to react for a long time. Moreover, the old man Yan continued to stab her in the heart without hesitation. If you want to die, die quickly. Don't implicate Lao Qi here. Zhou looked at Yan Lao with disbelief, but it was not as she had imagined that he had received the other person's obedience or tacit approval, only a deep chill that penetrated her bones. The eyes of the two met, and the years of tacit understanding between husband and wife made her shiver and wake up. She knew more than anyone about Yan Lao's obsession and understood the price that the other party could pay for those obsession. Her face trembled as she looked at Yan Qingzhi standing on the side, then at Yan Lao too with a cold expression on his face. She immediately realized that there should be something she didn't know about the two of them, and perhaps even involved Yan Maowen. She was very aware that she had been wandering around the Yan family for years, and even if she had killed Yan Mao Chun, she could escape unscathed, relying solely on her sons. And among these sons, the remaining 5 combined are not as good as Yan Maowen. Old man Yan dreams of changing his family, wanting to return to Zhaodu with the legacy of his father in his lifetime, stand in front of the main lineage again, and retrieve what belongs to his own branch. That is the obsession of several generations of the Yan family, deeply ingrained in their bones. No one can stop this idea. Before, he had a light and gentle demeanor, which was not suitable for the sons of the Yan family to study. He picked up a bowl of water because he didn't care about anyone except himself. But since Yan Maowen's sudden rise, his heart can no longer calm down. Yan Maowen only with words and phrases, it is his only hope to achieve his ideals, and for the sake of eloquence, he can give everything he can. End of this chapter.